against the wall. I'm never giving up, I give my all. I'm never looking back, attack, it's in the past. Stand up, stand up, stand up. You ain't ready for me. Give me your best shot, the stronger I stand. Not looking for a step.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to ZFG Radio. I am here with the wonderful lady Liana, and today's topic is something very special to you, and it's very pinnacle in the wrestling I grew up watching, because a lot of people have called this moment, whether you like it or you hate it or indifferent, it is literally the birth of the Attitude Era. Because if this never happens, Vince never goes out on Raw and says the old times are out, the new times are in, and whatever the hell he says. It is the 25th anniversary of the Montreal Screwjob that we are approaching. And for those of you who don't know what the Montreal Screwjob is, if you've been living under a rock for the last 25 years, Survivor Series 1997, Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart would collide for the WWF title in a very controversial match. Not because of the match itself, which did have a lot of heat going into it, if you remember Sunny Days and whatnot, but it had a lot of controversy outside the ring. Contracts were up, negotiations were made, people were leaving, punches would be thrown, spit would fly, as Road Dogg likes to call, a massive missile-sized loogie that was aimed directly at Vince's head. So let's break it down. Let's talk about this. So, October 20th, 1996, it is reported here at the Wrestling Observer by Dave Meltzer that Bret Hart's in a hotel room in San Jose, California, hours before making the biggest decision of his life. And this decision would be whether if he would go to WWF or stay with WWF or go to WCW. And at this time, this is before guaranteed contracts are a thing. You know, this is before guys like John Cena, The Rock, and Stone Cold are making lots of millions and millions of dollars, as Vince would like to say. Who would win the biggest bidding war of history of pro wrestling? And this really was the biggest bidding war at the current time, because there wasn't a bidding war over Hall and Nash. There wasn't.
There was, at the time, because, I don't remember, because, I remember, I know in retrospect, but at the time, there was no bigger star than Bret Hart.
So,
it really was.
You were an adult watching this.
I'm going to be 50 on Monday.
Yeah, so you were 25. You were my age when this was happening.
Yeah, I was your age when this happened, so I was already transfixed into the world of wrestling. Bret Hart was already my hero, and, I already adored him, and I already knew that something, I didn't know what was going on going into Survivor Series, but because the dirt sheets weren't really out at that time.
Yeah, and I was just fixing to ask you, explain to us, because, in today's day, you could literally look up anything you want and find out, is there somebody leaving after this pay-per-view? There's a lot of dirt sheets out these days. The internet has taken over the world of professional wrestling.
The dirt sheets were out there, but it was hard to access them. The internet was still relatively new.
Is it true that you had to pay to get a hold of Dave Meltzer's shit back in the day?
Yeah.
Because I know Conrad Thompson talks about it on every wrestling podcast that exists. But, sorry, Conrad, if you watch this, I am a fan, but Jesus, you're on everyone's podcast. Take a break. But
yeah, you had to pay for PWI, you had to Wrestling Observer, you had to pay for all that. Like WCW magazine, WWF magazine.
I remember the magazines. I used to have those. Yeah, I used to pay for those. I actually have the last issue of the WWE magazine, in my possession. Not the last issue, but the last set of issues.
I have a ton of WCW and WWF magazines.
I'm jealous about that. So, let's get back into it here. The biggest bidding war in the history of professional wrestling. So that was said. So, in this day and age, obviously we know that MJF's contract is up in 2024, and people are saying that is going to be the biggest bidding war of professional wrestling. So at this day and age in 1996, you've already kind of touched on it, but I just want to clear the air here. Do you really feel like that this was the biggest bidding war to that moment in professional wrestling?
In that moment, yes, because Brett was a huge star, and Davey and Owen were there, and Jim the Anvil Neidhart was there, and you had the Hart Foundation was a hot commodity, and you had in that same Survivor Series you had Team USA versus Team Canada, and like you had a lot of heat going into it with Sean and Brett having had multiple encounters before that as well.
All right, so he pretty well leaned towards staying with the World Wrestling Federation despite a much larger offer from WCW, but had changed his mind a few times over the previous 2 weeks as each side presented new offers. In the waning hours, Eric Bischoff and Kevin Nash were trying to convince him to change his mind on how great life was with an easier schedule. Yeah, because WCW wasn't doing like they weren't like national.
Like,
they were
from my understanding, 350 days a year with WWF and like 200 days a year
with WCW. Yeah. Bischoff was offering big money and a shot at becoming a movie star, a goal Hart had been pursuing while on semi-retirement from wrestling since dropping the title to Shawn Michaels a few months earlier at WrestleMania 12, which was the boyhood dream has come true.
Now, Brett had been guest starring on Lonesome Dove, and so
I remember that. I've seen those episodes. Yeah.
Yeah, he was really pursuing it, and the other thing is that what's interesting is that you talk about WrestleMania 12, and as much as I hate that Brett loses the title at WrestleMania 12, that's one of my absolute favorite matches.
Well, that's also like if you ask a lot of people, because I know that fucking the WWE does a video every year around WrestleMania where people talk about their like top 10 or top 5 favorite WrestleMania matches, and at least 80% of that roster throws that match in the top 5.
Yeah.
So, and even me, who I wasn't even alive at that moment, but I've rewatched that match, I've seen every WrestleMania actually countless times, but I've even put that match in my top 5, and not because I'm a Bret Hart fan or a Shawn Michaels fan, because I'm actually opposite. Neither one of them were my top guys that I loved, but that match was fantastic.
Yeah, it was.
Vince McMahon was offering him, now in the immortal words of Arn Anderson, not just a spot, not a spot, but the top spot in the company. The chance to be a major part of deciding the future direction of the company, and almost literally to be WWF for life. Yeah, because I remember hearing about it. Apparently that contract was going to be the Undertaker contract. 20 years, lots of zeros, lots of years, as Taker put it. Many close advisors of Hart tried to tell him going to WCW was the best move for his present and, more importantly, his future after wrestling. But largely out of loyalty, and that obviously wasn't the only factor involved, he declined the offer. McMahon, determined not to lose a very public fight, offered him the famous 20-year contract, where he'd, after retirement in about 3 years, become almost a first lieutenant when it came to the booking process. I never knew that.
I will say this, that the dirt sheets weren't. They were there, but they weren't accessible.
Yeah, like, not as accessible as they are today.
Not like now. But like, I do remember that Vince. This is hard for me to talk about because, like, I think you should explain really quick how big of a Bret Hart fan.
Liana is a very, very big Bret Hart fan. She looked up to Bret, idolized Bret. To this day, we still have the argument over Goldberg and Bret Hart, which we will touch on later in this podcast because Bret. But
Vince was like the father.
Yeah, and Bret has said that very publicly about a handful of times, actually.
And again, going back to the dirt sheets weren't around at that time, but you saw that relationship between them.
Oh yeah, because there was a video that was released before the Montreal Screwjob where Bret comes back after a match and Vince, like, it was the Vince hug.
Yeah.
He was like one of the first guys to really get it.
Yeah.
Hart would earn somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.5 million per year as an active wrestler, and a healthy but far lesser figure working the front office for the 17 years after retirement as an active wrestler. As part of Vince McMahon's offer, he was also going to allow Hart to explain live on television his decision-making process should he sign with WCW. Whoa. Hart flew to Fort Wayne, Indiana, where the WWF was holding its live Raw taping after having already verbally agreed to the deal, signed the contract, and gave the interview saying that basically he would be in the WWF forever.
Now, stopping there as a Bret Hart fan, you signed a contract. You said that you were going to stay with WWF for life. And then you went and jumped ship to WCW.
Hold on. So apparently, it goes further into this saying that he didn't, he hadn't actually signed it yet. So hold on. Figuring to be positioned as the top babyface and perennial champion until he finished his active career, riding off in the sunset in a blaze of glory, like Hogan, Savage, and the rest of the superstars before him didn't. As in the case of wrestling, not all promised scenarios and everyone believed were going to happen transpire as originally planned. And just over 1 year later, the feelings between McMahon and Hart had taken a 180-degree turn to the degree no one had ever believed. March 10th, 1997, top babyface didn't last long as Vince asked him to turn heel. At first, Hart balked at the idea, but after 3 days, McMahon presented him with two lists. One list was his prospective opponents as a babyface, Vader, Mankind, and Stone Cold. The other list was his prospective opponents as a heel, Undertaker, Michaels, Austin. Hart agreed for drawing money his opponents as a heel made up a better list, and he and McMahon agreed that he would turn back babyface the last few months of his contract and end his career on a positive note. He and Stone Cold did the double turn at WrestleMania. Hart then came up with the anti-American angle, where he would remain a babyface in Canada and Europe and do interviews that would, for the most part, speak the truth, so when the time came, he could turn back in the U.S. and have a reasonable explanation. So
I will tell you really, really quick before we get off on anything. I love that.
Yeah, I was about to say
that Canadian heel. I loved it
because and a lot of people have tried to do it since. It's been often imitated. They've tried to do it multiple times. I think TNA is the only company that was really ever able to spark another anti-American angle outside of the Iron Sheik and shit like that, because Sheik was that is the anti-American angle that everyone tries to be, but no one can get heat like Sheiky baby. But I remember I remember that because it was a Survivor Series, I think, or maybe it was a SummerSlam. It was Team Canada and it was the Hart Foundation versus Team USA in the guerrilla warfare match. And I remember one part Stone Cold has a trash can and he's on the apron and he just chunks that shit across the ring and nails Bret in the head. I remember that. September.
I still remember those. I loved it. He would come out in the Edmonton Oilers jersey, him and Bulldog and Pillman and Owen. That was good times. And
it was wild that
even watching that even for you in retrospect is fun to watch. But watching it happen, every Monday night was pretty awesome.
Yeah. September 8th, 1997. Vince McMahon and Bret had their first meeting where McMahon seriously approached Bret about his contract. About 3 months earlier, McMahon had told Hart that the company was in a bad financial strait and they might have to defer some of the money until later in the contract. This time, his approach was more point blank. He wanted to cut Hart's regular salary around $30,000 per week, more than in half, and defer the rest of the money until later in the contract period, when hopefully the company would be in better shape financially. Hart declined the suggestion because he didn't want to risk not getting the money in the future after he was through taking all the bumps. So, in September, Vince goes up to him and says, hey, we're not drawing that much money. And they really don't have a megastar. I mean, granted, Stone Cold has done the King of the Ring thing.
Stone Cold's not there yet.
Yeah, and he hasn't hit the glass. I mean, they have the WrestleMania thing, but he's still that's... in my opinion,
Stone Cold's not there yet.
Yeah, he's
Stone
not
Cold's
there
not
yet.
there yet.
And Bret,
he's like that. WrestleMania 13 was the beginning
of Stone Cold.
It was.
The King of the
But
Ring was a
he
major
wasn't-
part, but he
wasn't
had to
there
have
yet.
that WrestleMania moment.
Yeah.
Now, I've watched a lot of shoot interviews, in my time of being a wrestling fan, and every time Bret Hart is mentioned, and I'll pull one specific line because it's from a guy that I look up to, Kevin Nash, because we're for life. He said that Bret Hart was the $300,000 champion. And Bret's deal was that he could draw in Canada, he can draw in Europe, but he couldn't draw a dime in the States. And I think that's the problem with having a mega star like that, because to be a mega star, in my opinion, you got to be like John Cena, like Hogan. Because as much as I don't like Hogan, Hogan drew everywhere.
Hogan was over.
Yeah, Hogan was, I think, until guys like Stone Cold and The Rock really peaked through, and now guys like John Cena, MJF, and shit like that, I think Hulk Hogan was the biggest star. And Hogan's still going at this point, because this is the height of NWO, too. So, just before they drag in 90 million thousand members of that. So, we are at September 8th, now we're going to fast forward to September 20th, 1997. 1 hour before beginning of the pay-per-view show in Birmingham, England, McMahon approached Davey Boy Smith and asked him to put over Shawn Michaels that night for the European title. Smith was apparently shocked, having been told all along the build-up for the show was Michaels was going to do the job for him, since Europe was promised to be Bulldog territory. Which, incredibly over in Europe. Incredibly over. The explanation, which made and still makes logical business sense, is that they wanted to build for a bigger show. A second pay-per-view from Smith's former hometown of Manchester, England, where Smith would regain the title. The same scenario the WWF did to draw 60,000 fans in San Antonio, with Michaels in the other role working a program with Psycho Sid. So it all made sense. It was just rather strange he wasn't approached with this idea until just before the start of the show. So I understand Bulldog's anger with that, because you're at the show, you're at the building, you're like, hey, I'm going in, me and Sean's gonna tear it up, I'm leaving European champion, crowd's gonna go home happy, I'm gonna go home happy, Sean, fuck you, bye, we'll see you at the next show. And then Vince goes, hey, I want to draw money at this show, so he's got to be the champ going in. Which I understand. Because I understand both points. Because Vince goes, we made a lot of money tonight, but I want to make a lot of money tomorrow. And to do that, he's got to be there with the strap. I also didn't like the European title. Hot take there, but
I love the European title. I love the European title.
I liked the IC. The IC made sense, but in my opinion, it's like the All Atlantic title in AEW.
You got to see the Intercontinental Championship in its heyday. You didn't get to see the European Championship in its heyday.
I mean, you're right. Like I did see the days when Val Venus was European champion. William Regal made the belt matter again later in WWF.
No. British Bulldog is a European champion.
Oh, well, yeah. At around the same time period, McMahon approached Hart about working with Michaels. Hart said that he had a problem with that since Michaels had still never really apologized to him for the Sunny Days comment. So the Sunny Days comment happened earlier than I thought. I thought it happened in the build-up to Survivor Series. So it happened earlier.
Now, Again, I want to reiterate.
It was made for Bulldog. It wasn't even made for Bret.
Yeah, and I know that. I want to reiterate, I'm a huge fan of Bret Hart. I idolize Bret Hart. I love Bret Hart to death, but the man is so fucking bitter.
Well,
the man is so fucking bitter.
My problem...
I got his phone number, and I called him. He's like, call my office.
My problem
Did I ever
with
tell
Bret,
you about that?
Yeah, you told me. My problem with Bret at this point is... apparently there's some trust issues in your relationship you need to work out. If your wife's calling you going, hey, motherfucker, remember that conversation we had where I didn't trust Sonny to begin with, and now Sean says this? Something happened that Bret's not talking about, which is none of our business. Like, I agree it's not our business. No one needs to know what happened with their relationship, but it's something he needs to work out and quit blaming Shawn. Now, granted, at this time, very publicly, Shawn Michaels is a dickhead. No one liked Shawn at this point. The Clique even said they couldn't stand him half the time because him and Kevin Nash get into like several arguments on the road where Nash literally leans over and goes, "I'm gonna fucking hit you," and Shawn goes, "I'll shut up." So, at this same time period, he approached it. Sunny Day's comment and said that it would be hard to trust somebody like that in the ring and due to their past, and told McMahon that he would figure that Michaels would have the same concerns since a few weeks earlier, after first making it clear he would never work with anyone in the Hart Foundation, Michaels had finally agreed to only work with Smith, saying he couldn't trust Bret or Owen, but literally works with Owen immediately after working with Davey Boy. Because I remember that match, because I know they have the European title match for that, because I know that it's at a England show, or maybe it's it's an England show, where it's it's Owen and Shawn, and then it goes to Owen and Davey Boy. So, fast forward now 2 days, September 22nd, 1997, on the day of the Raw taping at Madison Square Garden, McMahon told Bret Hart flat out they're going to intentionally breach his contract because they couldn't afford the deal. He told a shocked Hart that he would go to World Championship Wrestling and make whatever deal he could with the group. "I don't feel comfortable doing it," Hart said of the suggestion. "I feel like an old prisoner in a prison where I know all the guards and all the inmates, and I have the best cell. Why would I want to move to a new prison where I don't know the guards and the inmates and I no longer have the best cell? I really feel bad after all the years of working for the WWF." Hart had an escape clause built into his contract since he had so much negotiating leverage when making the deal with WWF 11 months earlier, in that he could leave the company giving 30 days notice, and he would have what the contract called reasonable creative control of his character during that lame duck period, so that he couldn't be unreasonably buried on the way out. There was a window period giving the notice and negotiating elsewhere that hadn't begun, so McMahon, showing that he was serious, gave Hart written permission to begin negotiating with WCW, and Hart contacted Eric Bischoff that same day during a meeting with Hart, Michaels, and McMahon. With Hart, Michaels, and McMahon told both of them point blank that he wouldn't do any jobs for anyone in the territory. Word that when it got out made most of the top wrestlers feel even more warmly than usual towards Michaels. So Michaels literally says, "I'm not doing a job for anyone." And at this point, Nash is gone, Hall's gone, Kid's gone. It's literally just him and Hunter. Michaels then Jesus Christ. Reiterated.
This is like and right around this time, which I don't think that is the very genesis of DX.
Yeah, this is what DX has started.
Yeah.
Because Bret Hart names them.
Yeah.
Bret Hart literally says you're a bunch of degenerates. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he goes, "We're D-Generation X."
Yeah.
So then, Michaels then later reiterated that statement to Hart on October 4th in St. Paul, Minnesota, when the two had agreed that for the good of business that they'd work together. All right, so October 4th, they go, "Hey, let's fucking do business." At the meeting, McMahon proposed a scenario where the two would have their first singles match in Montreal, where Undertaker would interfere, causing a non-finish. This would lead to Hart wrestling Taker at the December 7th pay-per-view in Springfield, Massachusetts, where Michaels would interfere, causing Hart to lose the title. Yes, that's at the In Your House Cold Day in Hell show. I remember this. Okay. As poetic justice, since his interference caused Bret to win the title in the first place, and that Royal Rumble on 118 in San Jose would be headlined by Taker versus Michaels. During the meeting, Hart told Michaels that he'd be happy to put him over at the end of the run, but Michaels told Hart flat out that he wouldn't return the favor to him. That is very common knowledge. That was actually said. Hart and Michaels spoke again on the subject on October 12th in San Jose, where once again Michaels told Hart he wasn't going to do a job for him. So, it's a pity party between both men up to this point.
Yeah.
Shawn's being a little bitch. I'll say that. Shawn's going, Bret's like, "Hey, I'll do this." And then Shawn goes, "I'm glad, because I wouldn't do it for you."
Yeah. It's always been like that. It was always like
And also
that.
remember, like, this is the height of the drug addiction, the painkillers. His life's personally falling apart. His friends have all left. He's only got Hunter now at this point. And I'm not trying to, like, pull sympathy for Sean at all, because Sean's even said, hey, I was a fucking horrible person. And they have since buried the hatchet. But, alright, so October 21st, 1997. I'm born by
They're
this
best
point, by the
friends
way.
now.
I'm
They
born
talk
at this
all the
point.
time.
Yeah. Also, I have something to tell you about what Bret Hart done, like, this last week that I didn't know about. We'll talk about after we get through this. October 21st, 1997. I am at this point, I'm 11 days old at this point. It's very, no, 20, yeah, I'm 11 days old at this point. McMahon approached Hart with the idea of losing the title to Michaels in Montreal, but promised he would win it back on December 7th. Hart, remembering his conversations where Michaels was adamant about not doing any jobs for him in the territory, was reluctant, saying that after the way the angle had been done with him representing Canada, it would be becoming a big patriotic deal. He didn't want to lose the title in Canada. I'm not going to say it. He was then asked to lose...
Say it. Say it.
Maybe he's a Canadian hero. I'll say he is. He was over in Canada. But that's like saying that fucking Shawn Michaels isn't going to lose in the States. In Texas, I understand.
Would you want, okay, so you put Sean in that same scenario in San Antonio. It ain't happening.
Sean's not putting you over in San Antonio. He'll put you over in Dallas.
Yeah, Houston.
But that's my thing, though. Sean just doesn't want to do it in one city. There's a little bit... There's difference there. That's one city. You could go the next night on Raw and Sean will lose in Dallas. Bret's like, dude, you got a whole country I ain't fucking losing in. I ain't losing in Canada, homie.
But
And
they
then-
had built him as a Canadian hero.
Which, yeah, and maybe
in
he
folklore, in folklore, and in work. I'm not sticking up. I'm just.
No, I
going
know.
back.
I'm just... It's just still so silly to me. Like, if I'm sitting there in the office, right, I got all these booking decisions I gotta make, and some asshole walks in and goes, yo, homie, I ain't losing in Canada. I'm like, yo, homie, you fucking losing in Canada. Like, I don't know what the deal is. But... Oh, okay, then he asked Bret to lose to Michaels on December 7th in Springfield, Massachusetts, in the United States, no longer in Canada. Hart then told McMahon that since Michaels had told both of them he wasn't doing any jobs, that he had a problem doing a job for someone who wouldn't do a job back. So my thing is, I understand Michaels says, I'm not going to do the job for you. But if he's leaving, if you're out of here, if you're going to WCW, you're not going to fucking see Shawn again. Why does it matter? Like,
It's
it's a respect thing, I get it.
I think the way that I look at it, because I was living that, and Bret had just become this, like, icon of integrity. You know, that belt meant something when it was for me and for people who saw Bret as a hero.
Well,
you know, I'm the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. We believed him.
yeah. So hold on. So later that day, McMahon, Pat Patterson, Michaels, and Hart had another meeting where Michaels, teary-eyed, told Hart he was looking forward to returning the favor to Bret, and once again talked about his mouth, saying the stupidest things in regard to saying he would never do another job in the territory. Hart then still refused to lose the title in Montreal. So Shawn goes, hey, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said it. My mouth said some stupid shit. I'll do the job for you, bro.
At this point, as someone who's been in the wrestling business, at this point, you have said numerous times that you're not going to do the job.
Yeah,
Guess
numerous
what,
times, yes.
I'm not doing the job either.
Yeah. Alright, so Hart still refuses to lose the title in Montreal. The night before, he'd been asked to put Hunter Hearst Helmsley over in Oklahoma City due to pinfall. I'm sorry, I'm just imagining Bret losing to Triple H before Triple H is over it. I can't imagine it. Like,
He's losing to Hunter.
yeah, he's losing into Hunter Hearst Helms. Oh, he's not even that gimmick anymore. He's
He's the
Hunter.
Blue Blood.
No, the Blue Blood's gone at this
He's
point.
Hunter at that point.
Yeah, he's just Hunter. Well, he's Hunter Hearst Helmsley, but they don't call him Triple H yet.
Yeah, he's not Triple H yet.
Due to Shawn Michaels' interference, but changed the finish to a countout. On this night, he was asked to tap out to Ken Shamrock before the DQ ending involving Michaels, which he had no problem doing because he liked and respected Shamrock and wanted to help elevate him. The personal problems with himself and Michaels, which had become legendary in the business, resurfaced once again when the two McMahon had an agreement to work together but to leave their respective families out of the interviews. It took just 1 week before Michaels did the interview talking about Stu Hart being dead but walking around Calgary because his body and brain hadn't figured it out yet. I remember that promo. I laughed. I shouldn't have, because I'm all like, Stu looked bad. By this point, Hart had already stopped watching Raw because he had problems with the content of the show and because he had 4 children that were wrestling fans that he didn't want seeing the direction it was going. So he was reacting to the remark based on the fact that his father and brother Owen heard the remarks and were upset about it. Now, I would be scared if Owen was upset, because at this point, Owen's jacked. Owen's in the best shape of his life at this point. And is this before he dumps Austin on his head?
I'm not really sure.
Okay. I'll have to look that up here in a second. October 24th, 1997. So, those conversations, the teary-eyed apology, the Shamrock thing, that whole conversation happens the 21st. We're now to the 24th of October. Michaels, before the show at the Nassau Coliseum, told Hart that the money situation in the company had changed and they would have no problems paying him everything promised in the contract. 1 month after he says, hey, we're fucking broke, we can't pay you, he says, hey, things are changing. You and Shawn are drawing money now. Hart told McMahon that WCW really hadn't made a serious offer, that he didn't really want to leave, but he was still uncomfortable doing the job for Michaels. So now I'm mad, because now he goes, hey, they didn't like really make me an offer, but I still don't want to lose to Shawn. So at this point, he still has 3 years before he's going to retire. But I'm not losing to Shawn in Montreal.
Okay, so as someone who is a Bret Hart fan and who idolized Bret and just absolutely, I still adore him, as bitter as he is. At that point, Bret is seen as this icon, and I know I'm repeating myself, but this icon of integrity, you know. And I'm the best there is, the best there was, the best there will be. 5-time WWF champion, you know, and like he came from the old school of wrestling, and Shawn was the new school, and you know, I can see where he's coming from, you know.
I mean, I get it. So then he left the country for a tour of Bahrain and Oman with the idea that he was staying with the WWF, but knowing due to his window in his contract, he had to make the decision and give notice by midnight on November 1st. October 31st, 1997, my first Halloween ever, being alive. Halloween night. Never one to work without a flair for the dramatics. Bischoff finally caught up with Hart, who was basically incommunicado in a foreign land most of the week. Just one day before Hart had to either give notice or stay for another year, Bischoff made a huge concrete offer. We don't know the exact terms of the offer, only that Hart had said of the $3 million per year figure that both Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler talked about on the 11/10 Raw, that they don't have any idea what I was offered, but others close to the situation saying the figure is close enough that you couldn't call it wrong. Hart neither agreed nor turned down the offer, but gave the impression to WCW they had a great shot at getting him. So,
do you have any idea how much turmoil as a Bret Hart fan that I went through after Montreal?
I'm going to get there.
Him go to WCW.
I'm going to get there. Hold on.
I'm not even knowing what's going on leading up. Like at this point, this is all backstage shit that I don't know what's going
Yeah,
on. Because,
hold on. We'll
you know,
get to that. We'll get to that because I want your immediate reactions to Montreal and what happens afterwards. November 1st, Hart had until midnight to make up his mind. He called Vince and told him that WCW offer and said that he wasn't asking for any more money to stay, but that he wanted to know what his future in the WWF would be over the next 2 years as an active wrestler, and at this point was leaning towards accepting the WCW offer. McMahon said that he'd think about it, call him back in 1 hour with some scenarios. Before McMahon called him back, Bischoff called again, tried to solidify the deal. McMahon ended up calling back 4 hours later from his barber shop in Manhattan and told Hart that he didn't know what he was going to do with him, but to trust his judgment because of their past relationship, that he had many. This would it says many him into a superstar, but I think it's supposed to say made him into a superstar, and wanted him to stay, and that he should trust him, and asked Hart to give him ideas of where he wanted to go. During the conversation, McMahon still brought up the scenario of wanting Hart to drop the title in Montreal, but promised he would get it back in Springfield. I realized that he had given the top heel spot to Shawn, but to turn back babyface, it was too soon, Hart said. Like in the negotiations 1 year earlier, I was going down to the wire, and he said I had until midnight to make up his mind. When he was talking to McMahon told him he could extend his deadline for giving notice. Hart asked for the permission in writing, but McMahon told him he was going to a movie that night with his wife and said he was verbally giving him permission to extend it and to get written permission from the chief's executive financial officer. What a gangster Vince is at this moment. Vince goes, I ain't giving you fucking written permission. And Vince is a gangster at this because Vince knows if he does this, Survivor Series is fucked because he can't fuck him at this point. Because if he gives him written permission, that extends it to the end of November, and Survivor Series is like right before the end of November, so I understand at this point. At 7 p.m.
Now, I do want to say, putting aside Brett, Survivor Series has always been huge to me because my birthday's in November.
And it was a big four. It was part of the big four.
And it was one of the big four. You know,
it was one of the only pay-per-views they were doing for a while before the In Your Houses happened. So yeah, this isn't like an In Your House that he's gonna fuck up. This is a pinnacle pay-per-view.
Yeah.
At 7 p.m., Bischoff called again and presented a deal that, according to Hart, would have been insane not to be taken. At that point, Hart was really having mixed emotions. He somehow felt bad about leaving the WWF and was just hoping McMahon would lay out a good set of scenarios for him and convince him to stay. At 9 p.m., McMahon called and, reversing fields once again, urged him to take the WCW offer. Hart told him that his heart was with the company and it would break his heart to leave, and that he appreciated everything McMahon and the company had done for him. McMahon told Hart that he wanted him back as a babyface, and he had been wanting him to turn babyface for 2 to 3 months, but just hadn't brought it up until this point. He then presented a scenario to Hart, presenting it as a way to get Hart to stay, but obviously designed to get Hart to take the WCW offer. He wanted Michaels to win the title in Montreal. For Springfield, they would do a Final Four match with he, Michaels, Taker, and Shamrock, and that Michaels would again win. At the Royal Rumble, the two would have a ladder match and Michaels would win. On Raw on January 19th in Fresno, Hart would open the show, say that if he couldn't beat Michaels and win the title that night, that he would retire from wrestling, and at that match, he would regain the title. Then in Boston at WrestleMania, he would drop the title to Austin. Hart looked at that scenario of 4 major losses with only 1 win before his midnight deadline. This motherfucker said wins and losses matter, Vince. Gave official notice.
Well, I mean, I see where you're coming from, but you're in the age now to where, it's kayfabe was like a real thing.
Yeah. Well, so
at this point, when people were losing matches, you were like, "Oh my god, my hero's losing matches."
So, but
even though you knew it wasn't "quote unquote" real.
No. Brett outs the fact that they're fake later. That it's fake later. So hold on. So.
But not at this time.
Well, yeah, no, not this time yet. People still believe wrestling's real at this point. Like, this is a real thing. People, Bret Hart's in newspapers because people think that this shit's real. So, I just want to touch on the fact that he goes, it'd be 4 major losses. I understand that he doesn't want to lose because he's a Canadian hero.
Well, not only that.
Well, hold on. So,
you're not giving him any momentum going into Montreal.
Well, so my thing about it is that there's been multiple storylines in wrestling before where this guy just loses and goes, give me one more shot and I'll put it all on the line. Like, let's go back to the Dolph Ziggler promo with The Miz a few years ago. That was a career-making promo that went nowhere.
But not at this time.
No, I know.
Not at this time.
I feel like that could have been a big... I really would have liked to see that storyline, actually.
But it would have been a downward spiral.
For Bret, yeah.
But
Bret's also, you also have to realize, Bret is going to the end of his career at this point. So it would make sense for him to start falling off. But I understand. I firmly believe wrestlers should go out on their shield and go out on a loss anyway. So, let me see where I'm at with this. Hold on. Hart looked at the scenario for major losses. Oh, he gave official notice to the WWF and signed the contract WCW had sent over with the agreement for all 3 parties, and that word would not leak out until November 2nd or November 10th to protect the Survivor Series pay-per-view. Hart went so far to have his few confidants sign written confidentiality letters to make sure that word of his negotiations and signing with WCW would not get out until November 10th. Good guy, Bret. Good guy. Proud of you for that. I never knew that. That's a piece of information I never knew.
And in retrospect, like, you're filming Wrestling with Shadows this whole time.
Yeah, he's filming all of this, yeah. Piece of shit. November 2nd, 1997. Hart and McMahon started a very applicable conversation with the pressure finally off and the decision for Hart to leave had been made. He again suggested that Michaels win the title. So the dude's like, I'm out, I'm leaving. He goes, all right, cool. He's still winning in Montreal. What will go down as perhaps the ultimate irony. Said that they could do a screw job ending to steal the title from him, and that the next night on Raw, McMahon suggested the two get into a mock argument where Hart would punch him, blaming him for the screw job. And McMahon even suggested to hardway him, stiff him. That would either open him up or at least give him a noticeable black eye to make it look legit. I'm going to touch on this later. Remember that moment, November 2nd, that conversation happens. Again, Hart refused to do the job in Montreal, so he never refused to do a job, but he wasn't going to lose on Sunday or Monday at the Raw tapings in Ottawa. So now he's not losing in Ottawa either. He says Montreal or Ottawa, it ain't fucking happening. Now we've moved to two spots in Canada, he ain't losing. Provinces. I almost said states. I'm glad you stopped me.
Province.
Alright, so I can't say yet because we're not at the end. That makes me feel like it's a work now. That makes me feel like the whole Montreal Screwjob is a work, just because if you remember what happens after Montreal, bam, Vince has got it. I never knew that. I did not know about that conversation. Now I feel like it's a work. Alright, let's continue. He agreed to put Michaels over in Madison Square Garden on November 15th, Springfield, or anywhere else. He even said that he'd put over Vader, Shamrock, Mankind, Taker, or even the Brooklyn Brawler, who earned a title shot at Madison Square Garden by winning a Battle Royal at the last show, but they dropped the idea almost immediately. But there had been talk of giving Lombardi the match after all. McMahon then made legal threats to Hart, said if he wouldn't lose in Montreal, Hart talked about the clause in his contract giving him reasonable creative control, but McMahon claimed refusing to drop the title in Montreal wasn't reasonable. The two argued about the finish in Montreal and the legalities of their respective positions all day Sunday and well into the night before finally agreeing to a DQ finish in Montreal.
Now, again, I have no idea what's going on at this point.
Yeah, nobody knows.
All backstage. Nobody knows what's going on but Vince, Bret, John, and whoever's in the room.
Hunter. I know that Hunter's in the room for every single one of these conversations.
So,
and Owen. This is what's not talked about. Owen's in the room for all of them too.
And the thing is that Vince and Brett agree on a DQ finish.
And Brett.
Vince and Brett.
Yeah, Vince, Brett, and Vince, Brett. Sean doesn't know about it yet.
Yeah.
So.
But Vince and Brett agreed to a DQ finish.
In Montreal. In Canada. He's gonna look like a coward in Canada. Taking a DQ finish. Okay. Alright, Brett. Canadian hero. I ain't losing clean. Then in Springfield, in the Final Four match, Michaels would win the title. Brett would then go on to Raw on December 8th in Portland, Maine, give a farewell interview as a babyface to WWF fans, put the company over, and McMahon over as big as possible. He would apologize to the American fans to reasonably explain his actions as a way to end his 14-year association with the WWF on the highest note possible, something largely unheard of in pro wrestling, so that all parties and the fans could come out of it and his legacy with the company with a good feeling. Technically, there was a big problem in that, and that his contract with WCW would begin on December 1st, so Hart called Bischoff, who was then presented the scenario, who would allow him to work with WWF through 12/8. Hart then asked an associate who monitors news for him if he thought that was possible to keep the secret from the public until November 10th. Hart specifically asked about being able to keep it a secret from one person until after the show, and the associate laughed and said they would bet $1 million that person already knew. I want to know who it was. Apparently there was one person that wasn't supposed to know, but they already knew, and this is when shit hits the fan. I want to know who the person is. Because I also learned that Mike Today is working for Dave Meltzer at this point.
Really?
And he's working for WCW as well. So, that brings a lot of, like, I wonder if Mike Tenay has anything to do with any of this getting out. So, that was November 2nd. We're going to fast forward 2 days to November 4th. McMahon calls Hart and says that he had changed his mind. He now suggests that Michaels should lose to him in Montreal and that he'd steal the title with a controversial finish in Springfield, and Hart would get to do his farewell speech in Portland. He said he was going to call Michaels and present the scenario to him. By this point, word that Hart had signed with WCW had actively been reported the previous night on the Observer and Torch hotlines, and it was only 1 hour later before the folks who call those hotlines for much of the news.
I couldn't afford the hotlines.
Yeah, it was 99 cents a minute. That's wild.
Well, not only that, you had to get your parents' permission, because I remember, like, I'm going to put myself out there. I would call those 1-900 talk numbers where you just talk to other teenagers. And my dad got that phone bill. I got my ass kicked. So when the 1-900-9900 came out, I was not fucking around with those. Because I was in my 20s.
All right, hold on. So, the news broke as the latest, biggest story in the history of wrestling as their exclusives. In response, WWF Canada released a press statement originally totally denying the story, claiming it was simply propaganda being spread by WCW. However, as the word got out, Titan Sports in Connecticut a few hours later contradicted the story, saying that Bret Hart was exploring all of his options but not going any farther, with the feeling that he wanted to protect the pay-per-view. Hart would not talk publicly to anyone about it. Good guy, Bret. Good guy, Bret.
I think at that point, like, I just remember something had made the news about Bret, but that Bret wasn't commenting on it, so I just kind of brushed it off.
Yeah, I remember my dad told me about this like 10, 15 years ago. He was all like, yeah, I remember like watching CNN one day, and this shit came up, that Bret Hart might be leaving the F, and he was all, and it literally says Bret Hart and others refused to comment, and It was Eric Bischoff that had said, we look forward to working with Bret Hart, is what he says, and this is when everyone's like, oh, he fucking signed.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to fast forward one day, November 5th, 1997. The internet had paved the way for stories in the Calgary Sun and the Toronto Sun, and one line in the Montreal Gazette, and a pay-per-view preview story about Stone Cold, a line which resulted in the paper getting an incredible switchboard-blowing response of phone calls. McMahon called Hart and said that Michaels had agreed to the previous day's scenario, and that now he had changed his mind. He said that the news was out everywhere and that Bret had to drop the title before Monday, and said that he couldn't have Bischoff go on television on November 10th and announce the signing of his world champion while he still had the belt, which I totally understand.
Now, I will tell you, at this point in time, the internet is not accessible like it is now.
Yeah, you had
People were
to.
paying lots of money for the internet,
and it was
so
slow.
like I don't even remember anybody that had the internet back then.
The first time I remember anything about the internet, I think I'm 5 or 6, and I remember hearing the "You got mail."
Yeah,
And my grandpa's like, "Oh,
and people were
got an
paying
email."
major money for.
Well, it was major money
dial-up.
back then. Now we would look at it and be like, "Oh, that's pocket change," because
Yeah.
the bills are so high.
But
now.
dial-up, it was dial-up.
Yeah, dial-up, and it was so
dial-up.
weird. I remember when the computer would start, it'd be like beep. Yeah.
Yeah.
November 5th. Oh, okay, we already did that. Hart said that he would get Bischoff to postpone the announcement, but with Bischoff on a hunting trip all week in Wyoming, Hart couldn't get a hold of him. McMahon then asked Hart to drop the title on 11/8 at the house show in Detroit. Hart then refused. Feeling the way that everything had been built up, he wanted the match with Michaels, which in the wake of all the insider publicity was building up to a life of its own, like no match in the recent history of pro wrestling, to not come off as anticlimactic, and for that it needed to happen, and he needed to go into Montreal as champion. He said that he would drop the title anytime after 11/12, suggesting that he do it at house shows in Youngstown, Ohio, on the 13th, Pittsburgh on the 14th, or Madison Square Garden if they wanted it soon rather than waiting for 12/7. Jim Ross on the Company 900 line acknowledged the statement that Hart was exploring other options, said that nobody knows the real story, and in hyping the big match, tossed the phrase that they'd be pushing in the final days leading up to the match, that it'll be the first meeting in 18 months, and most likely the final match between the two ever. Which it was. It was the final match between Bret and Shawn ever. So that was true. November 6th. Whoa. In a story in the Toronto Sun, Tiger Singh, at a press conference promoting the WWF house show the next night in Toronto, said of Hart's leaving, "It's very disheartening. He's not only been a mentor, but I've been a great admirer of him ever since I was a kid. And that if he leaves, you're going to see a whole bunch of other people leaving. And I'm not going to mention any names, but WCW has been approaching a lot of people." November 7th, 1997, there's no question that the power of online services when it comes to the influence of pro wrestling was established this past week, and it was generally portrayed that it was a power struggle between Hart and Michaels, that Michaels had won out. And to a lesser extent, Hart was leaving over the direction of the product. While there is some truth to all of this, publicly the greatest truth of all that it was simply a manipulation by McMahon to get out of a contract that in hindsight he wished he never offered. Rather, Michaels, who the wrestlers feel that has McMahon's right ear now, has convinced him what turned around WCW was Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, but not Hulk Hogan and Piper, that he should and the company should do what they did to get WCW over. There was also feeling among WWF wrestlers that Michaels pushed McMahon in the direction to rid the company of his heated rival, who had apparently one-upped him when signing the new deal that made him much higher paid, that it was simply ego or economic because the company is in financial straits. Hart did have a lot of problems over the direction of company, and his own direction was partially made based on that, but it's clear in hindsight that McMahon had a strong hand in manipulating Hart's decision to get out of the contract, and the vast majority opinion online from people who really had no clue what was going on. Titan, McMahon, and Michaels were coming off as major heels. The WWF's own online site, said to be the domain of young kids with no clue about wrestling, was beside with the reports about Hart leaving, and the so-called marks were reacting very negatively towards Titan, and to the point Titan pulled all of its folders by the early afternoon, which caused another outcry of censorship of opinions from wrestling fans. Finally, McMahon responded publicly online with a letter of his own stating, "Over the past few days, I've read certain comments on the internet concerning Bret Hart and his alleged reasons for wanting to pursue other avenues than the World Wrestling Federation to earn his livelihood. While I respect the opinions of others as owner of the World Wrestling Federation, I feel like it was time to set the record straight. As it has been reported recently online, part of Bret Hart's decision to pursue other opinions is allegedly due to his concern with the direction of the World Wrestling Federation, whereby each and every individual is entitled to his or her opinion. I take great offense when the issue of the direction of the World Wrestling Federation is raised. In the age of sports entertainment, the World Wrestling Federation refuses to insult its audiences by terms of babyface and heels.
This is the beginning.
I hate that whole statement. In 1997, how many... Geez, this is a long... He goes off, bro. In 1997, how many people do you truly know who are strictly good guys or bad guys? World Wrestling Federation programming reflects more of a reality-based product in which life, as well as the World Wrestling Federation superstars, are portrayed as they truly are in shades of gray, not black or white. So he goes on in this, and he says that...
It's a long diatribe because this actually gets out.
Yeah, and he
actually,
says...
You actually get it, and like this actually, like he, like this actually, like.
And this is a big thing for Vince because Vince does not publicly speak.
No,
he's never done that. He really doesn't do that a lot. Like, I think he's only done it like 10, 15 times since I've been alive. He's not a public speaker. But he goes on and he says that Bret was actually concerned with more of the morality issues of WWF. Questionable language, gestures, sexuality, racial issues. All the issues mentioned above are issues that every human being must deal with every day of their lives. He says that a Shawn Michaels direction issue, as they would like you to believe, in the personification of D-Generation X, Shawn Michaels' character is expected to be living on the edge, of which I might add, Michaels portrays very well. You demand a more sophisticated approach. You demand to be intellectually challenged. You demand a product with attitude. As owner of the company, it is my responsibility to give you exactly what you want. Not Bret Hart, not Shawn Michaels, not Vince McMahon. May the best man win at Survivor Series. Wow, he puts over the match at the end. What a guy. What a Vince McMahon, ladies and gentlemen. Vince McMahon. Keep it kayfabe, Vince. Proud of you. So that only made the situation worse in regard to how fans were viewing McMahon and the company even worse. You demand to be intellectually challenged by doing racial angles. The fans chose that direction. They asked to see Michaels pull his pants down. Okay, so this is just Dave Meltzer going off about the fucking bullshit that...
And I'd like to go publicly on record on our podcast that I could not give a single fuck about what Dave Meltzer says or thinks.
Nobody... So... From what I've realized, and I listen to a lot of wrestling podcasts when I'm at work, a good 90% of them say the same thing. Fuck Dave Meltzer. Jeff Jarrett says it, Eric Bischoff says it, even Road Dogg's like, yeah, fuck that guy. There was a line, I don't remember if it was Jarrett that says it or Road Dogg. Oh, it was Road Dogg, because he goes, I still don't understand how Dave Meltzer gets to rate matches. And Conrad goes, what? He goes, so let me get this straight. A guy that's never taken a bump in his life gets to tell me how good I am? Okay. And then he just goes on. He moves on about it, which, Road Dogg, very professional. I like I said earlier, be a bad spot for him right now. So
yeah.
But he goes off. Dave Meltzer goes off in this whole paragraph basically saying that it's bullshit. The fans don't get to decide that, blah, blah, blah. Hart was booked for his first public appearance before the house show that night in the Sky Dome in Toronto. It was only a half-hour TSN. The off-the-record show. I still hate this show. This show is horrible. Mike Landsberg is a piece of shit. I fucking hate him. I hope he gets hit by a bus and survives.
I love Off the Record, and I love Mike Lamberg.
Of course you do. He opened the show saying that he had received more than 1,000 calls to ask Bret Hart if he was leaving for WCW. Despite the word being out everywhere at this point, Hart would only go as far as saying that he has given his 30-day notice to WWF and that he's reviewing offers from both groups and is extremely strongly leaning going towards one way.
The only reason I know at this point that this happens is because a friend of mine has cable and calls me and says Bret Hart's leaving for WCW. At this point, I know.
He says, I'd like to really come more clean on it than I can, than I have, but I have to do this thing by the book kind of thing. Hart categorized the split as not being a money issue, but that he and the WWF had reached kind of a crisis, or we've reached professional differences as to what direction and the wrestling shows are taking. You know, I'm not saying I'm always right, but I feel like some of the content of the shows goes against my belief in what wrestling should be and can be. Later in the show, he criticized Michaels and said that wrestling is often scoffed at a form of entertainment, sometimes, or it used to be. I believe it came way up. I was very proud of the direction, which has a lot to do with where I am right now today. Wrestling was cleaned up and it became something families could watch. He talked about the inner workings of the business, having to trust the guy you are working with because you give them your body, and said the real animosities and hatred exist have to be set aside. He said that everything he had said about Shawn Michaels is about the Shawn Michaels character, but said that Michaels had said things that hit a raw nerve with him to the point that it's unprofessional. So let me get this straight.
So let me say that as somebody that's been in the business, when somebody shoots a promo on you, they're talking about your character, not you.
Well, yeah, you know? That's my thing.
And the thing is like Brett just felt like Shawn was going over the edge, you know, and that Shawn was pushing the envelope.
Okay.
And as a Bret Hart fan, I never liked Shawn. I never liked Shawn.
And this has been very publicly proven. You cannot be a Shawn Michaels and a Bret Hart fan. It's impossible.
Now I will say this in light of what you just said. There was no denying when Shawn hit the ring.
You're getting what you paid for.
Yeah. There was no denying.
Alright, so the show aired footage of the Shawn Michaels interview where he blamed the Hart Foundation for trashing the NOD dressing room and insinuating that Hart was a racist. Hart said that he doesn't blame Michaels for that. That's obviously a promotional direction, and that's a poor concept. I think that the racial tension is something to be very, very careful with. When you start messing around with racial things that I don't like, Hart said that he stopped watching Raw about 5 weeks earlier because he didn't like the direction, and when the host brought up Michaels calling him the Grand Wizard, a KKK reference, not a reference to the famous wrestling manager of the 70s, that he brought up what Michaels said about his father that he didn't see. You know, I don't mind if someone pokes fun at my dad. Jerry Lawler's made a living in the last 2 years or 3 years saying comments about my mom and dad, but he's always fairly humorous about it. Actually, I used to get offended at some of the things he used to say about my mother until I realized that my mother thought they were humorous, and by that it was okay with me. He then spoke length about Brian Pillman. By this point, in certain circles, and particularly within the industry, interest in the match on Sunday, due to all the uncertainty, some of which was known and most of which actually wasn't, had reached a level not seen in years.
So at this point, this interview had my friend that had cable had taped this interview and brought it over, and I got to see it before the match. So it fueled me.
Brian Pillman's dead at this point.
Yeah.
He died the day I was born, October 5th, 1997. So I like the fact that he brought up Pillman. For all of Hart and McMahon's wanting to keep the story quiet, word was getting out was the greatest thing for the buy rate. There were 14,374 fans paying $296,674 at the Sky Dome the night of the show to credit the huge house for the interest in Canada since Hart was leaving it.
What were the... Okay, so not only the 14,000 watching at the Montreal place?
No. This is the house show on the 7th.
Okay.
This is in Toronto. The Sky
Okay,
Dome.
so this isn't even the Survivor Series.
No, this is 2 days before it.
Oh.
Yeah, so they're in Toronto, and the crowd is chanting, "You sold out" to Hart. Canada has turned heel, ladies and gentlemen. They're chanting, "You sold out. You sold out. Fuck you, Brett. You sold out." Although that it should have been expected, Hart had been a pro wrestler for 21 years and been around a business a lot longer than that. The chance in his home country, knowing where he was going, knowing what he was going through, did get to him. I would imagine. Obviously, if you think you're a Canadian hero, you go to Canada, you walk out the crowd, you're like, "Woo!" And they're like, fuck you. And we're like, all right.
Shit.
The main event was a 6-man tag with Taker, Mankind, and Austin versus Brett, Smith, and Neidhart, subbing for Brother Owen, who was supposed to start back but wasn't ready to return with a severe concussion from a few weeks earlier. Brett was asked to do the job for the Stone Cold Stunner, debated the question for a while, then refused, figuring he was the only Canadian in the main event and the U.S. versus Canada type match, and it was a big nostalgic angle, and Austin ended up hitting the Stunner on Neidhart instead. So now he says, after getting booed in Canada, I'm not losing in Canada now. November 8th, WWF ran a house show in Detroit at Cabo Arena for what would turn out to be Bret Hart's final match in the United States as a wrestler for the WWF. Tensions were really high, and the prospects of a double cross were looming by this time. But in many of the more paranoid types, this was 1997, this was the World Wrestling Federation, that stuff from the 20s when the real bad guy lowlifes were running the business. The days of making Luthez world champion because you needed someone who could handle himself in case of a double cross had been over for more than 3 decades. So he's saying Bret Hart could get the shit kicked out of him. People would be like, oh, that's believable. That day, Hart went to one of the members of the front office that he knew he could trust, Earl Hebner. While there are what you call...
Stop. Just at this point, like, again, I don't know what's going on other than the TSN interview, but this pulls at my heartstrings. This is where it starts getting rough for me.
Yeah, this is...
Because he's talking to Earl.
This is a big one. While there are a lot of what you can call good acquaintances in the business, Hart and Hebner were genuine close friends for years. Hart said that he used his influence to get Hebner to referee the match because he wanted someone in the ring that he could trust. Hebner said that he understood the situation and told Hart, I swear on my kid's life that I'd quit my job before double-crossing you. Damn.
Yeah. Okay, hold on. Okay, let's put it all, the Goldberg thing to the side. As a Bret Hart fan, that right here,
that would
even you.
Yeah, that's...
Even you are like, damn.
On a personal basis, a little more than 24 hours later, remembrance of the conversation crushed him more than anything. At the same time, the WWF Brain Trust was in Montreal one day early. Vince McMahon held a meeting at the local hotel with Jim Ross, Jim Cornette, Pat Patterson, and Shawn Michaels. Reports that at least 2 of the aforementioned names looked extremely uncomfortable leaving the meeting. Ross on the WWF 900 line filed a report saying due to the tension between Hart and Michaels that there would be armed security backstage and the two would dress far apart from each other as possible, and that this was a total work since Michaels and Hart actually dressed together and were on professional terms the next afternoon. He also said that McMahon was not going to announce the show. Instead, he would be headlining any last-minute problems backstage. Ross also hinted that it could be Hart's final match in the WWF, something Hart at that point wasn't aware of. November 9th, The Prelude. Imagine going into the most anticipated match inside of pro wrestling in years, and on the day of the show, not having any semblance of a finish. McMahon and Hart met that afternoon, and McMahon said something to the effect of, what do you want to do? You got me by the balls. Hart said that he just wants to leave the building with his head up. Hart said to McMahon, let me hand you the belt on Raw the next night in Ottawa. Everyone knows I'm leaving. I'd like you to tell the truth on Raw Monday. At this point, the truth wouldn't include talking about finances, contract breaches, arguments about finishes, or anything that would make McMahon or the company look bad publicly. McMahon said that he agreed, and it was the right thing to do, and the two shook hands on it. Hart and Michaels were dressing together, putting the match together. Both were professional with one another, talking about putting on the best match possible and Hart's last hurrah, agreeing to a DQ finish about 17 minutes after a lengthy brawl, before the bell would even sound to start the match. As they were putting their spots together, Patterson came in. He had a suggestion for a high spot in the match as a false finish. There would be a referee bump. Michaels would put Hart in his own sharpshooter. Hart would then reverse the hold. Hebner would still be down at the point, not see Michaels tap out. Hart would then release the hold to retrieve Hebner. Michaels would hit him when he turned around the switching music. A second ref, Mike Chioda, would haul ass to the ring and begin the count. A few paces behind, Owen Hart and Smith, possibly Neidhart as well, would run down to the ring. Chioda would count 1, 2, and whoever got to the ring first, likely Owen, would drag Keown out of the ring. While they think they've saved the day on the pin on Brett, suddenly Hebner would recover 1-2, and Brett would kick out. That would set the pace for about 5 minutes of near falls before it would end up in a disqualification ending. Before the show started, both Vader, and with his Japanese experience, and Smith told Hart to watch himself. He was warned to not lay down or allow himself to be put in a compromising position. So Vader had been double-crossed in Japan 6 months prior to this, I learned. So Vader was fighting Tenzin for the Inoki Federation Championship. Vader was laying down. Tenzin jumps on top, and the referee goes 1, rings the bell. And they said it was Japanese rules, which would go back to collegiate wrestling rules, which it was the big thing. He was told to kick out at 1, not 2, and not allow himself into any submission holes. Hart recognized the possibility of the situation, but his thoughts regarding a double cross were more along the lines of always protecting himself in case Michaels tried to hit him with a sucker punch when he left himself open. The idea of that being put in a submission or one of the near falls or working spots would be dangerous for him, would be something to worry about normally, but he put it out of his mind because he had Hebner in the ring as the referee. It's time for the match.
Now, I did want to say this, that how long is the match?
Let me look that up. $12 minutes.
Want to watch it?
Yeah, we will. Hold on. The WrestleMania match was 62 minutes long. All right, so we go. The match. People on the inside were watching this as close as on the outside. Would Brett do the job? Would Shawn do the job? Would Brett give Shawn a real beating before putting him over? The Molson Center was packed with more than 20,000 rabid fans, and up to that point were seen as a largely lackluster undercard. While the fear going in and about the word getting out of Hart leaving hurting the pay-per-view most likely turned out to be just the opposite, the sellout was not indicative of that either, as it was well known by the advance that the show was going to sell out 1 or 2 days early. It appeared that 10 to 20% of the crowd knew Hart was leaving, and that there were negative signs regarding his decision and negative signs towards the promotion for picking Michaels above him in the direction that seemingly forced him to leave. Some things were also strange, not just the absence of McMahon from the broadcast. Hart, the champion of the main event, wasn't scheduled for an interview building up the match. When his name was announced early in the show, there were many boos from fans who knew he signed with the opposition. Once he got in the ring for the introductions, Michaels wiped his butt, blew his nose, and then picked his nose with the Canadian flag. He then put the flag on the ground and began humping it. Hart was immensely established as the babyface. The two began the match with a brawl all around ringside, into the stands. The crowd was so rabid that it appeared a genuine danger that they would attack Michaels. At one point, they were brawling near the entrance, knocking down refs as planned, knocking down Patterson as planned, and as planned, Hart and Michaels had an argument, almost teasing the idea of a spot later in the match where Hart would deck McMahon. It was also clear that everything was going on 100% professional, and the only curiosity left at this point was how good the match was going to be, and it appeared to be very good. How would they get out of the match with seemingly with something nobody will ever forget? But one thing was strange. Why were there so many agents circling the ring? Why was McMahon right there and acting so intense? About 8 minutes before the show was supposed to end, Bruce Pritchard, in the gorilla position, kind of the on-deck circle for wrestlers, was screaming in the headset that we need more security at the ring. Why? They had already done the brawl in the crowd. This was going to be a DQ finish, and it was still several minutes away. The double cross.
Okay, so before you get to the double cross. Okay, so you're not watching wrestling at this point.
My dad did. My dad ordered this paper.
But you're still a baby at this point.
Yeah.
So, watching this, and they're brawling, and Vince is there, and all these people are surrounding the ring is like it just made it more
So,
intense.
so actually, I don't know why they didn't note this. Vince doesn't come down until after the brawl. Everyone
No, he
comes
comes down
down
during the brawl. He
after.
comes down during the brawl.
Oh, does he? I
Yeah,
always
he
thought
does.
it was before.
Because
It was
they're up
after.
near the entrance, and Vince is screaming at
Oh,
Brett,
okay. All right.
and
So
a camera guy gets knocked over, I believe, too.
the double cross. Hart climbed the top rope for a double sledge on Michaels. Michaels pulled Hebner in the way. Hart crashed on him, just as planned. Michaels, for a split second, looked at McMahon and put Hart in the sharpshooter, just as planned. The next split seconds were the story. Kyoto, listening to his headpiece for his cue to run in, heard the backstage director scream to Hebner that it was time to get up. Hebner, listening himself, immediately got up. Kyoto started screaming that he wasn't supposed to get up. Owen Hart and Smith, readying their run-in, was equally perplexed seeing him get up. Pritchard was freaking out backstage, saying that wasn't supposed to happen. Brett, still not realizing anything was wrong, laid in the hold for only a few seconds to build up some heat before doing the reversal. Michaels clinched down hard on the hole, glanced at Hebner, and then looked away, which more than one wrestler in the promotion, upon viewing the tape, saw as the proof that he was in on it. But then fed Brett his leg for the reversal. Hebner quickly looked at the timekeeper and screamed, "Ring the bell." At the same moment, McMahon, sitting next to the timekeeper, elbowed him hard, screaming, "Ring the fucking bell." The bell rang at the same moment. Brett grabbed the leg for the reversal, and Michaels fell down on his face on the mat. I remember that. It was right as he sweeps the leg, the bell
Now,
sounds.
and I want to say, this is the shittiest looking fucking sharpshooter I've ever seen in my life.
You also have to realize, though, like, the plan is that he slaps it in him, cranks back, and then Brett sweeps like he's not supposed to sit in it.
Yeah.
But then, you know,
And then what's funny is like I've got Wrestling with Shadows, and
it's on Peacock too.
yeah, and I've got all this different footage and shits with Brett, and you can see Sean is not happy about it.
Michaels' music played immediately and was immediately announced as the winner and new champion. Hebner sprinted out of the ring and on the other side into the dressing room. That's a lie. Hebner does not stop. Hebner runs immediately, and him and Cornette jump in the car together. Cornette tells the story on one of his U-shoots. He says as soon as the bell sounds, he's already halfway out the door. Hebner jumps through the window and gets in the car with Cornette, and they speed off. In a waiting car in the parking lot that had already had the motor running was going to take him to the hotel where he'd be rushed out of town with his ticket home instead of staying to work the next two Raw tapings. Michaels and Hart both leaped to their feet, looking equally mad, cursing in McMahon's direction, glaring at him. Hart spits the loogie of the decade into McMahon's face. The cameras immediately pulled away from Hart and to Michaels. Vince screamed at Michaels to pick the fucking belt up and get the fuck out of there. Michaels, still looking mad, was ordered to the back by Jerry Briscoe, who told him to hold the belt up high and get to the back. The show abruptly went off the air about 4 minutes early.
Yeah, it did.
The aftermath. The officials left the ring immediately. McMahon went to his private office in the building with Patterson and a few others, locked the door behind him. Hart in the ring flipped out on the realization of what happened and began smashing the television monitors left behind until Owen Smith and Neidhart hit the ring to calm him down. The four had an animated discussion in the ring, all looking perturbed. Finally, Hart thanked the fans for the most part, with the air let out of their sails, gave them the "I love you" sign to the fans, and finger painted WCW to all four corners of the ring, which got a surprisingly big pop. Went back to the dressing room. He first confronted Michaels, who swore he had nothing to do with it. Michaels, obviously afraid Hart would punch him out right there, told Hart that he gets heat for everything that happens, but this time it wasn't his fault, and he was just as mad as Hart about the finish. He said he didn't want to win the belt that way and was disgusted by what happened, and to prove it, he would refuse to bring the belt out or say anything bad about Hart on Raw the next night. Hart said that Michaels could prove that he was in on it or not by his actions on television the next night. The entire dressing room was furious at McMahon by this point. The feeling was that if Hart had worked for the company for 14 years, not missing shows due to injuries the entire time, and having made McMahon millions of dollars throughout the years, could get double-crossed this bad, then how could any of them trust anything he say or do? People were saying that, how could anyone trust anyone ever again, and how this was an unsafe working environment. For 3 years after the steroid trial and all the bad publicity, McMahon had worked feverishly to change his legacy in the industry, not as the man who ran all the other promoters out of business, not the man who marketed pro wrestling to young children while pushing steroid freaks, not the man who destroyed wrestling history and created his own, not his Harvard MBA worked billion-dollar company, a man who was so vain as to give himself a huge reward in Madison Square Garden as the genius who created WrestleMania, not the man who at one time would try to monopolize every aspect of the business for himself, but instead as a working man's hero, coming from humble beginnings, fighting those ruthless rich regional promoters through nothing but guts, guile, and vision, became the dominant force in the industry and taking it to the next level. So, let's talk about this. This is something I did not know. Undertaker goes to Vince McMahon's office, furious, pounding on his locked door. When he came out to talk with him, Taker told him under no certain terms that he needed to apologize to Hart. That in no uncertain terms he needed to apologize to Hart. He went to Hart's dressing room where Hart just came out of the shower. Smith answered the door, and Hart didn't want to see him. Vince and son Shane came in with Sergeant Slaughter and Briscoe anyway. Vince started to apologize, saying that he had to do it because he couldn't take the chance of Hart going to WCW without giving back the belt, and he couldn't let Bischoff go on the next night and announce Hart was coming while he was still a champion, and said how it would kill his business. Hart shot back that he had no problem losing the belt and told McMahon that he was going to dry off and get his clothes, and told McMahon, if you're still here, I'm going to punch you out. Hart called McMahon a liar and a piece of shit and talked about working for him for 14 years, only missing 2 shows the entire time, being a role model for the company, blah, blah, blah. He goes off on a rant. Hart got dressed and told McMahon twice to get out and then punched him in the face. Apparently, a lot of people say it was like a hockey fight, actually. He grabs him, pulls him, they do this for a little bit, then Hart uppercuts him, and that's where he gets the black eye.
Because, I mean, okay, so, I will say, from what I've heard, Vince is no, pushover. I guarantee you Vince held his own during this.
Oh, yeah, because Vince is actively in the gym at this point, too.
Yeah.
He's in phenomenal shape. So, at this point, McMahon gets punched out. He's growling like he's going to get back up, but he had no legs. Shane jumps on Brett's back. Smith jumps on Shane's back, pulling him off. Not realizing there would be trouble, Smith had already taken off his knee brace. Hart nearly broke his hand from the punch, and McMahon's jaw was thought to be fractured or broken. Hart asked Vince if he was now going to screw him on all the money he owes him, and a groggy Vince told Brett no. He told Shane and Briscoe to get that piece of shit out of here, glaring at both of them, and told them if they tried anything, they'd suffer the same result. And dragging McMahon out, someone accidentally stepped on his ankle, injuring it as well. Later, there was a meeting held. Hebner claimed ignorance and swore that he knew nothing about it. Was so mad that he was going to quit. Patterson, Michaels, and Pritchard all denied any acknowledged to the boys that had anything to do with it. Everyone denied it. So let's talk about the aftermath. So that night, there's a lot of guys there. Everyone sees this happen, and everyone's like, we're done. We're leaving. Mick Foley is watching the show. He was on the show. He sees the double cross goes down, and he goes, that's disrespectful as hell to Brett. He looked up to Brett. He says, I'm out. He goes home. Or he doesn't actually go home. He goes to his hotel. He tells the story. He said in his book he went home, but he's like, I was wrong about that. I remember now. I was in my hotel room. He goes to his hotel room in Canada. Never leaves Canada. Sits in his hotel room for 2 weeks. Actually holding out on his end of the bargain. Saying that, hey, I ain't fucking doing it. But had been watching Raw and had realized that no one else felt the same. Everyone was all like, fuck it, dude, we still got a job. And Mick goes, I gotta support my kids. And he goes back, and Vince actually was all like, hey, no hard feelings. Thank you. Thank you for being a man. And obviously Mick Foley becomes, you know, the Hall of Famer.
Mick Foley. Yeah.
It becomes Mick Foley. So it's funny because one of the things that I didn't know about this was that Undertaker and Shawn Michaels have more than one run in where he's got to be like, Shawn, you come this close, because he Montreal and then WrestleMania the next year, because it's WrestleMania the next year where he's going to drop the strap to Austin, and people are like, oh, hey, he's not doing the job, and Taker goes, I bet he does, and he tapes up his fists and waits in gorilla for him, and goes, if he doesn't, he's coming back and getting his ass beat. But
I remember, like, the reason I said let's watch the match is because I kind of wanted to give you my reaction, or even if you want to show me the end of the match.
Oh yeah, most definitely. Let me pull this up here real fast. I gotta pull my peacock real fast. I want to see your peacock. Can't say that one. I can say it on here. I don't care. Survivor Series. Watch on Peacock. $9.99. That's 23. That's 2007. That's 2002. 95. 96. 97. There's not even a cover for this one. Can I watch it? I can't. Okay. I really thought they had it where you couldn't watch it for a second. I was about to be very upset. Alright, so hold on. So we're going to watch this.
We can watch the last few minutes if you want.
Iconic entrance. Oh wait, I have to hide that because I can't it's one thing I can't stream the pay-per-view. So it comes out to a decent pop. I want Shawn's entrance. Here we go. Oh, that is full screen. Okay. So that's another thing. Shawn doesn't have anyone come with him. Neither does Brett.
You see that sign that says, why wait, leave now, Brett?
Possibly the two biggest egos in all of wrestling are about to collide. And of course, you know, it's not about the money.
So let's watch.
By the way, the European title is not at stake in this match.
Let's watch this.
And Michaels lifts
Up and over by Shawn.
upside down. Look out!
Russian leg sweep by Brett.
You know what's next?
Cover.
There's a cover. 1, 2, and
Near fall.
can you believe Shawn Michaels again?
And he never hits him. He could have punched him right there as he came up. Could have. Damn.
A lateral press after the Russian leg sweep. And then the lower abdomen takes a pounding. Matter of time, Ross. He's being set up for the sharpshooter. You know it and I know it. No doubt that would be Bret Hart's crowning achievement. Oh, you kidding me? Make Shawn Michaels give up.
Oh.
All he wants to do
Best
is
suplex in
lateral
business.
press. And Michaels again, showing great
Well, not the
tenacity,
best,
is able to
but one
kick
of
out.
Nah, it was one of the best in the business.
20,500
Brett, I don't like Brett.
man standing.
personally, but professionally, one of the best in-ring performers. One of the best technical wrestlers, anyway. Here we go. Here's the moment where the treachery begins. Brett goes high risk. Double axe handle. Bam, Hebner goes down. Good spot by Hebner. Good ref bump.
Now this is where Kyoto's supposed to come out.
No, not yet. Not yet. Brett's supposed to go. Sean's supposed to go for a cover, and that's when Kyoto comes out.
And again, Michael's raking the face.
This is it right here.
Look at this! Oh, you're kidding me. Michaels, are you going to try to
Hebner's not supposed to be up.
Yes, he is! Are you kidding me? What happened? What happened? Bret Hart gave up with a sharpshooter. Wow, you talk about controversy. This crowd is living. Michaels with a sharpshooter has become
Yeah, he's telling him hold the title up.
and Bret Hart is standing in disbelief. Ladies and gentlemen, good night from Montreal.
Oh, they cut out the... I could see why they did that. I'm not upset with that. So, now we've seen the end of
I
it.
literally got chills and got angry just like I did when it happened.
So, the next night on Nitro, the whole NWO comes out. They got the Montreal tiny flags, or the Canadian tiny flags. Bischoff had already announced on Nitro 1 hour earlier, and what was the same angle he's done it many times to tease and deliver the opposite, that Bret Hart had signed with the NWO, not just WCW, that he was joining the NWO, which was, even to me, that was a bigger deal, because DX was the answer to NWO. So what bigger way, because he fought DX the whole time, was all like, can't beat him, go over there, go be for life. Bischoff opened the show with the entire NWO holding Canadian flags, badly mocking, singing "Oh Canada." Announcers Shivani today, Larry Spisco talked most of the first hour about the announcement with Shivani today, likely on orders from Bischoff, acting stunned, describing Hart as a second-generation wrestler who stands for tradition. In other words, positioning him as another Kurt Hennig or Jeff Jarrett, rather than the level of Hogan, to justify a nearly $3 million per year salary. Sabisco was the one who acted as if he didn't believe it. In the first commercial break, Gene Okerlund did a 900-line tease saying how Bret Hart punched out a prominent official, saying that he'd have the story on his hotline, which did huge business. So, the fight was never acknowledged until years later. Bret Hart was not for the Attitude Era. He hated it. The Raw the next night was filled with "We Want Bret" chants. Jim Ross went on the 900 line on Raw and did nothing but put Bret over, praised him for all of his work, saying that he never saw Bret tap, that he thought it was stupid. So he praised him. You know, no one buried Bret. So I totally understand. You know, I don't.
I at this point, I don't. I think we have cable, but I'm not I'm not watching Monday Night Nitro or Raw because, like, maybe I'm not allowed to at this point.
Now hold on. So November
I'm in my
17th.
I'm in my 20s and I'm living with someone else,
Yeah.
and they don't
November
like wrestling. So
November 17th is when is when McMahon cuts the promo. The Vince didn't screw Vince.
right,
Brett screwed Brett.
yeah.
And the time honored tradition angle and all that, introducing the Attitude Era. So, a few things to take away from the Montreal Screwjob. One, a lot of fans believe that if this moment never happens, the Attitude Era never happens. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, because Sean kind of embodied the attitude that needed to, this. Sean was the spark for the Attitude Era. So yeah, I believe that.
So, Mick Foley
Now I'm a big
leaves.
fan. I'm a big fan of the Attitude Era.
Oh,
You know,
yeah. It's one
I
of the
still
most.
watch it,
Yeah.
even though I'm pissed. I'm more of a WCW person, but
I was more
yeah,
of a
still watch
WCW
the
guy. I don't
WWF.
blame you.
Yeah,
I was more of a WCW guy.
yeah.
Um, so then let's talk about what happens to Brett. So Brett goes to WCW, and let's.
The build up is amazing. The build up is amazing. The build up is just like Brett's coming to WCW. And I think his first appearance is as a guest referee for, I think, Randy Savage versus Roddy Piper.
That wasn't his first. So, November 10th, 1997 is when the Montreal Screwjob happens. December 15th, 1997, Bret Hart makes his television debut with WCW. He was also voted the most hated wrestler of the year by Pro Wrestling Illustrated 1998. The documentary Wrestling with Shadows releases in 1998, talking about the Montreal Screwjob that Vince McMahon sues him over because it was illegally filmed, and Vince wins and gets all of the footage and still hasn't aired. So, I mean,
Wrestling with Shadows is still like a thing. I have it on DVD.
it's on Peacock. So let's talk about Bret Hart's run in WCW.
Let's not.
So
By the time he got the title was already lackluster.
I'm trying to find.
His United States title run was good.
Oh well, yeah.
I enjoyed that.
So Bret Hart had his first WCW pay-per-view match, his first WCW match against Ric Flair. It sold out, where he defeated Ric Flair. Hart elected to defend the honor of WCW against the NWO, defeating members Brian Adams in his debut Nitro match on March 2nd, and Kurt Hennig at Uncensored. In April 1998, Hart interfered in a Nitro main event between Hogan and Savage, helping Hogan recapture the WCW World title, turning heel in the process. He also became an associate of the NWO, but not officially a member. His second Nitro match was on June 22nd, defeating Chris Benoit with the help of NWO. He attempted to recruit his longtime friend into the NWO, but the offer was rejected. At Bash at the Beach, he captured his first championship in WCW when he faced Booker T for the television title. He was disqualified after hitting Booker with a steel chair. He headlined his first Nitro card on July 20th, defeating DDP for the vacant U.S. title with help from the Giant. On August 10th, he lost the title to Lex Luger, so he held it for not even a month. Less than a month. He regained it from Luger the next night on Thunder. In the main event of Fall Brawl, Hart was defeated in a War Games match for the number one contender spot for the WCW title. Hart then asked the fans for forgiveness, turning his back on Hogan and the NWO. A match between Hart and Hogan was booked for the September 28th episode of Nitro. During the match, Hart sustained a knee injury, which about ended in a no contest. Sting came to Hart's aid, which initiated the match with Hogan. Hart turned on Sting, delivering a DDT, which that bout was also ruled a no contest. Sting, a member of the rival NWO Wolfpack, was assaulted after the match, beginning the feud between Hart and Sting, which was fucking fantastic. Sting and Warrior beat Hogan and Hart by disqualification, which was the shittiest match of all time. Hart's feud with Sting ended at Halloween Havoc with the defending the U.S. title against Sting and kayfabe injuring him with the baseball bat shot to the back of the head 12 times. He hit him 12 times with a baseball bat. Believable wrestler Bret Hart beats another man with a baseball bat 12 times in the head. But he had a problem with the direction of WWF. Okay. October 26th episode of Nitro, he loses the title to DDP. They headlined the following month's World War III pay-per-view, in which Hart lost. Damn, Page beat Hart. Hart regained the title from Page on the November 30th episode of Nitro in an ODQ match, help from the Giant. On February 8th, 1999, the U.S. title was lost to Roddy Piper. March 29th episode of Nitro held in Toronto. Hart appeared in street clothes and denied the world champion Ric Flair as well as Hogan for avoiding a match with him. Finally called out Goldberg, claiming he could beat him in 5 minutes, and verbally coercing Goldberg into giving him the spear, which he was wearing a metal breastplate.
And he had the Toronto Maple Leafs jersey on.
Yeah, Goldberg actually got a concussion for that, and
then he gave one back to Bret.
Yeah, and then he grabs the mic. Bret does say, "Hey Bischoff, in the WCW, I quit." In reality, he sustained a groin injury by the hands of Dean Malenko, and he needed time off for surgery. On May 23rd, 1999, the night before Hart was scheduled to make an appearance on The Tonight Show to hype his return, his brother Owen died at a WWF pay-per-view over the Edge. He took a further 4 months off to be with his family. Hart returned September 13th, 1999 on an episode of Nitro to team with Hogan against Sting and Luger. And then he defeated Chris Benoit in a special Owen Hart tribute match in Kemper Arena in Kansas City. And the ring was moved to the exact spot where Owen died. And he put Benoit in the sharpshooter in that spot. It was beautiful.
And I will tell you, that is one of my favorite Bret Hart matches.
It's one of the best WCW matches of all time.
Yeah.
And I hate Bret Hart.
Hate's a strong word.
But I mean it. Hart challenged for Sting's WCW World title on October 18th of Nitro. Lost the match. He was attacked by Luger. After a series of world title matches against Sting, Hogan, and Goldberg at Halloween Havoc, a tournament took place over the next several episodes of Nitro. Hart's first round match against Goldberg the night after Halloween Havoc, with the bout being a tournament match for a berth in the next round, as well as a match for the U.S. title that Goldberg had won the night before thanks to outside interference by Sid Vicious and the Outsiders. Hart defeated Goldberg and won the U.S. Championship for a fourth time. On the November 8th episode of Nitro, Hart lost the title to Scott Hall in a ladder match that also involved Sid Vicious and Goldberg, because no one beats the bad guy. Hart then wins the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. Okay, I thought I read Perry Saturn in the finals, and I almost cried. But he beats Perry Saturn, Billy Kidman, Sting, and Chris Benoit at Mayhem on December 7th. Hart and Goldberg wins the WCW Tag Team titles from Creative Control, making Bret Hart a double champion. Hart and Goldberg lost the tag titles to the Outsiders because no one beats the bad guy. On December 13th, at Starrcade, Hart defended the WCW World title against Goldberg. And this is the moment. A thrust kick to the head, resulting in a severe concussion. Hart later than speculated he suffered up to 3 additional concussions within the match. How do you get 3 more concussions in one match? Hart placed Goldberg on a post-figure forelock, which ended with Hart hitting his head on the concrete floor, so he gave himself one. When Goldberg failed to receive the move correctly. How do you fail to receive a figure 4 when that guy... Pray for me. Anyway. As part of his DVD documentary, Hart expressed as someone as good-hearted as Bill Goldberg and was responsible for hurting him. Roddy Piper rang the bell when Hart held Goldberg in the sharpshooter. Although Goldberg did not submit, Piper simply walked away, leaving Goldberg and Hart bewildered. Oh, that's right. They rekindled the Montreal Screwjob. Out of respect for Goldberg, Hart vacated the world title on the next episode of Nitro. So that wasn't the move that ended his career, because he wrestled again. Because then he joins the NWO when the Outsiders and Bret Hart beat up Goldberg the next night with baseball bats. Hart convinced them to stop and then hit Goldberg with one of the bats, turning heel once again. The three continued to beat him down. They were joined by Jeff Jarrett when Hart regained the championship, although it was Roddy Piper who was covering Goldberg to try to protect him when the 3 count was made. The NWO was reformed, now being billed as NWO 2000. Hart wrestled Terry Funk in a no contest in a hardcore rules match on Thunder. In his final match in WCW, he defended the World Championship against Nash on Nitro, which ended in a no contest. Hart vacated the title in late January when he was forced to withdraw from the main event of Sold Out due to his injuries. Hart continued to make appearances on WCW television, cutting promos. Hart made a run-in during a battle royal where he hit Hogan with a chair. He confronted Goldberg on the injury he sustained 9 months prior. You can't blame him at this point then. It's 9 months. You're still wrestling. You fought him 2 more times. You've even hit other people with chairs at this point, Brett. You're a piece of shit. Get over it. Hart then talks about his run at WCW, saying that his tenure was lackluster. Former WCW wrestler Chris Jericho attributed to this backstage politics and creative mayhem. He cited his steel plate segment with Goldberg and his tribute match to Owen Hart as his 2 worthwhile moments in the company. He said he was proud to have been WCW World Champion for a short time prior to his injury. He would return to WWE later. He fought Vince McMahon at WrestleMania 27, and then he would also help form the Hart Dynasty. He shows up at AEW to announce the AEW World Championship. He was also at Impact's Bound for Glory in 2020 to congratulate Ken Shamrock in the Hall of Fame induction. Cool thing, Bret Hart has his own wrestling promotion now. And I need, this goes into the next topic. So Bret Hart owns a wrestling promotion, and I want to get the name right, so I'm going to look it up now, because I saw it. Bret Hart promotion. Oh, okay. Yeah. Independent promotion called Dungeon Wrestling, which was launched by Blade and Dallas Hart and Kid Chocolate in April 2022, owned by Bret Hart.
Blade runs it, huh?
Yeah. The world title is called the Stu Hart Canadian Championship, and Nick Aldis is the champion. And it was Nick Aldis' first match since being announced that he was leaving the NWA, was to be a part of that promotion. He talks very heavily about that in the podcast that I sent you.
Very cool. Very cool.
But, yeah, I just like the fact that now he owns his own wrestling promotion, and hopefully, he can tell all of them about how unsafe Goldberg is. But, now, let's talk about, before this...
Let's not.
Let's talk about how this podcast is going to end. So...
Oh, how it's going to end.
After the Montreal Screwjob, Shawn Michaels obviously leaves has the back surgery,
Loses
comes
his
back
smile.
a brand new man.
Loses his smile.
Loses his smile, yes. He comes back a brand new man, finds Jesus, turns his life around,
Yeah.
becomes a phenomenal person, buries
Yeah.
the hatchet with Brett, you know, has a second career almost. Like,
Brett and Sean are like best friends now.
but it's funny because I feel like they switched personalities after Montreal. Because I feel like Brett took the Shawn Michaels piece of shit personality, because all he does is run down Goldberg, run down the Montreal thing, which he should, you know, that was a big pinnacle moment in his career. And then Shawn's like, hey, like, I'm sorry, like, I don't know what you want me to say. It's been 25 years. It's been 25 years, Brett. Like, every podcast that I've seen Shawn do, like, even when he was in Impulsive with Logan Paul, they talked about it. He goes, it's been 25 years. I've done so much more since then. And it wasn't the last time Shawn would be involved in controversy. Obviously, the Stone Cold thing, and then the Hogan thing, and then, you know, so on and so forth. And we'll talk about that in later episodes. But how do you feel about how Bret Hart went from an established hero? And I'm not going to say how the mighty have fallen, but talk about where Bret Hart now is in his life.
Well, I mean, you gotta look at it from, like, I can't separate myself from being a Bret Hart fan because I've got a signed Bret Hart thing. I've got 3 or 4 wrestling figures. I've got shoot interviews. I've got Wrestling with Shadows. I've got, like Bret's my favorite. So I still rely heavily on his WWF career because his WCW career was like lackluster to say the least. But to, you know, my personal experience with him to the side, I do kind of, you know, if I were to have a conversation with him, I would be like, why can't you just let it go?
Yeah. It's been 25 years. More importantly, the
I mean,
Goldberg
it
thing.
hurts me to watch. You know, it hurt me to watch it tonight, but at the same time, it's like, you know, it was 25 years ago, and even if it was a shoot, which I believe it was,
I think it was work. But...
it's over.
And see, like, if it is a work, it's one of the greatest works of all time because it's 25 years later and people are still talking about it.
Yeah.
If it is a shoot, you know, I mean, they made up for it. You know, they shook hands, buried the hatchet, but Brett's still not letting it go. You know,
which is sad because, like,
it's...
I've let, you know, I'm 50 years old and I've let things go.
Well, see, my thing is it's so weird to see how much of a different place Shawn is in his life. You know, because that was active drug addiction, active being a piece of shit. He's changed his life around. He's found Jesus. You know, he had I call it the whole second career when he came back in 02. The Shawn Michaels from 02 to his retirement at WrestleMania 27, and then you compare Shawn Michaels from 97 to before, it's like two different people. Still the same phenomenal entertainer.
When he won, I think when he won the world title at the Elimination Chamber, that was like the beginning of his new career.
His resurgence, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just, I'm sad that Brett didn't get that same resurgence. But Vince, at least publicly, Shawn did it. He apologized to him on Raw 12 years later.
Yep.
And then Vince did. And then Vince had a match with him. And Vince let... The thing about the Vince thing, a lot of people talk shit about Vince. Vince was man enough to go back into his locker room and be like, hit me. And he took it. He didn't swing back at him. And people have said, like, Vince walked out of there, was like, yeah, he hit me. I earned it. And then when he came back, Vince is like, do it again. If this is what you need to do. It says a lot about Vince's character. Like, yeah, Vince now, like, with what happened, with how he ended, there's a little, you know, I'm not going to touch on that, but before that says a lot about Vince's character. Yes, Vince has had to do a lot of shaky things in his life to keep his business afloat, but the man did the damn thing, like, and he did it well. So, I mean, and I'm not like babying Vince, I'm not babying Sean, you know, I think the Montreal Screwjob is a terrible thing, but at the same time, if that's what had to be done for business, Bret didn't want to do business, so in words of Triple H, let's do business for him. And so there's a lot of things you can say about the Montreal Screwjob. If you would have done it, if you were in Vince's shoes, or if you wouldn't have done it, blah, 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 blah. People can say that all day long, but nobody was in Vince's shoes. And I feel like it was that moment that re-sparked WWF, because, in my opinion, that moment gave birth to one of the phenomenal eras that people still talk about, still compare this era to, even though there's been the Ruthless Aggression era, which was equally as fantastic, but regardless. But it is 25 years later. We have talked about the Montreal Screwjob now for 2 hours. This is exactly as successful as an episode as I thought it was going to be. I loved talking about this. I was very excited when I realized what time of year it was. I was all like, it's 25 years. I know who I want on the show. So, I do plan on the next podcast being about Mick Foley, because there's some Mick Foley things I want to talk about. And we do plan on doing a stack episode later where we watch the very first episode of Impact, break it down, and give our opinions about that epic event. I have not watched it yet, so...
I remember where I was.
I will tell you the first time I ever saw TNA. This is a true story. It was 2008. Yeah, because Edge just beat Cena for the WWE title at New Year's Revolution, and then Cena's album dropped. Well, it was my birthday. So for my birthday, my aunt got me the John Cena album, and she got me a TNA triple DVD set, which had the very first pay-per-view, Victory Road, the very first Lockdown, and the very first Turning Point. So that was my introduction to TNA. Was I watched, and the fucked up thing was I didn't even watch them in order. I watched Lockdown first because I saw the cage, and I was like, oh, fuck, yeah, here we go. And that's where I got introduced to AJ Styles, and I fell in love with him. The match with Abyss, I was like, that's my hero right there. I want AJ Styles as the man. And then obviously I would later find DDP, Raven, Scott Hall, the man, Kevin Nash, Jeff Jarrett, all of them were involved with TNA as well. And then later, obviously, Kurt Angle, Sting, all those guys. I did not watch an Impact show until... Jesus Christ. I'm flipping through the channels on a Thursday night when wrestling was not a thing. We only had Raw and SmackDown, and SmackDown was on Fridays at this point. So on Thursday night, it's at 8:30. I remember this like it was yesterday. I'm watching Cartoon Network. The channel below it is Spike TV. I go down a channel, and it's R-Truth in the middle of the ring. And it's R-Truth, BG James, and Conan. I knew who two of them were. I didn't know.
Drew.
Yeah, I didn't know who R-Truth was. Because I didn't watch... I mean, I watched WWF, but like K-Quick, I didn't remember him. But I remember BG James, and the first thing that he says is, oh, you didn't know? And I was like, holy shit, it's Road Dogg. And I knew Conan from WCW, and I was like, oh, dude, I'm fucking hooked. And then I remembered, I was like, oh, TNA, wait a minute. And I ran back into my room, and I grabbed the discs, and I was like, oh, shit, this is it. And so I was hooked ever since. I found out it was every Thursday at fucking 8, so I had added TNA into my weekly programming, which would actually take over for a predominant time period, because I liked TNA better than I liked Raw at some points. But actually, it's a weird fact. Before this podcast ends, I didn't realize this, but do you remember when TNA moved to Mondays for like a month?
Oh, yeah. For a very short amount of time.
Do you remember what happened on the first episode of that Monday Night Impact?
I don't remember, like, specifically, but I remember
I do, and it has something to do with this episode. So Raw and Impact aired at the same... they only had 2 hours together, because Impact was only a 2-hour show. On the second hour of Raw, as Impact comes to the air, Bret Hart returns. What a way to spit in TNA's face. You're moving to Mondays? I got something for you. And the fucked up thing was, guess where the show was? Montreal. So what up? And it was the most viewed Raw until like this year. It was the most viewed Raw. Vince McMahon said, "Oh, they're moving to Mondays. I'll stop that right now." Because that same night, Brett comes back. Shawn and Taker are announced for WrestleMania. The Nexus beat up Bret Hart. John Cena does something cool. And Brett and Vince are made official for Mania. So like Vince is all like bam 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 to TNA, and TNA's like, we have Hogan. Like that's all we got. We got Hogan. But yeah, that ran for 3 weeks. It was 3 weeks they were on Mondays before they're like, we're done with that. We're done with that.
Because I remember I was watching TNA at the time. So like but then of course I got the announcement that Brett was showing up, and of course I flipped over to Raw.
I was flipping between them because Impact starts with Jeff Hardy coming back because they have the Asylum match, which was fucking god awful. Jeff Hardy comes back, and I'm like, oh, Jeff's back. Oh, all right, whatever.
Never been a big fan.
It was his TNA returns weren't special because like he didn't even come back yet. Like he did like a one-off appearance. He wouldn't come back for like 6 months actually, but he comes back, does his whole thing, does a swanton, twist of fate, blah blah blah, and then you flip over to Raw and Bret Hart's music hits, and then I'm like, well, I don't have to flip back now. So, and then I ended up flipping back, and then it was the NWO. It was Hall, Nash, Kid, and Hogan in the ring. And I was like, okay, I'll stay for this. And then Hogan's like, no, brother, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do the NWO. And I was like, oh, never mind then. Click back over to fucking Raw and finish Raw. I didn't give a shit about the rest of that episode. But I watched it back because I had it recorded. And it was a bad thing. I don't know what TNA ever thought they were going to do. But they were not competing with WWE.
Yeah.
But, alright guys. It has been a phenomenal episode. I hope you guys enjoy this. And for the first time ever, this episode is going to be seen live on... Let me see if I can go back here. It'll be on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. I'll be sending those links out as soon as this show airs. I hope you guys enjoy this as much as I do.
Hit that subscribe button.
Huh?
Hit that subscribe button.
Hit that subscribe button. Send us some money. Thank you guys, and good night.